Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It is our pleasure to greet you at the MFA Press Center. Today, we hold a press conference of the RF candidate for the post of the ITU Secretary General, Rashid Ismailov. We also have Deputy Minister of Digital Development, Communications and Mass Media, Ms. Cherkesova. By way of reminder, we are live. You can watch the broadcast on all media resources of the ministry, including in foreign languages. And now allow me to give the floor to Ms. Cherkesova. Thank you so much. First and foremost, I would like to thank the MFA colleagues for this opportunity, for this meeting. I would like to thank journalists for finding time to meet together. The meeting is dedicated to the future plenipotentiary conference of the ITU to be held from the 26th of September to the 14th of October. As you are aware, in Romania, at this conference, the members will elect the leaders of the Union. The Russian Federation nominated Rashid Ismailov as the candidate for the post of the Secretary General. The Russian candidate is well known in the international ICT community. In the ITU specifically, he has vast experience of implementing large-scale international infrastructural projects. He worked in international businesses such as Huawei, Nokia, and Ericsson. Currently, he is the president of a communication carrier Wimblecom. Mr. Ismailov is also successful in public sector. As you are aware, from 2014 to 2018, he was Deputy Minister of Communications and Mass Media of the Russian Federation. He supervised international interaction, among other aspects. In a word, he is well aware of the interests of the business and the state. And we are positive, should the Russian candidate be elected as the ITU Secretary General, the ITU role will be strengthened. The challenges of digitalization will be addressed to the benefit of all nations, including developing countries. Certainly, Russia today faces an unprecedented pressure, but hardly can anyone doubt that Russia has highly qualified IT specialists. Mr. Ismailov is one of them, and give the floor over to him now. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you so much for organizing this briefing. My biography was more or less covered by Ms. Cherkesova. I would like to briefly touch upon my program and leave more time for your questions. We had a small team of colleagues to build the program, and we considered various aspects. I also considered the programs of my colleagues. My program is called 5 Steps to Humanize the ICT. They refer to these steps as pillars. Pillars, in my opinion, are unfirm pieces. And I thought that in terms of dynamics, that would be better to call it 5 steps to the humanization ICTs. As far as humanization is concerned, over the last 20, 30 years, ICTs, talking about the locomotive of human development, it was the trigger industry that drove and encompassed all industries of human life, be it economy or spirit, mentality, consciousness, communication. Then we thought about the name, and we went to call it 5 steps. First, supporting the people-centered digital economy and society. The society is evolving. We are amidst the 4th Industrial Revolution, there are fundamental changes to functions of the society, humanity, covering all aspects of existence, and this race for technologies at some point totally forgot human development and the effect on humans, especially when such threats came into existence. It was the first time when we thought about this, when Snowden went to Moscow and told us about the PRISM. The second step, we thought that the majority of people is not the West or Russia centered. Instead, it is in the third world, as it used to be called, or developing countries, and the digital divide between nations. I mean, not just simply providing broadband access or internet to Kampuche village. No, to bridge this gap, we need to cover the issue of access to new ICT services. In addition to the access, we also need to develop human capacity in these countries in order to level the difference that exists. Then we thought that there are major risks due to the transition. Like in any technology, there are multiple benefits, but there are also multiple threats. We have to articulate them and focus on them. To manage risks emerging from this rapid development of ICTs, and its development should also be on the agenda of the International Telecommunication Union. Fourthly, establishing a favorable environment for innovation in the field of telecommunications, ICTs. Speaking of which, the ITU is a structure where multiple things are being developed in working commissions. However, together with this, it is my fifth step. There are multiple organizations that have bigger rates, speeds, rates of decision-making, standard development, Bridge BP, ICANN, Engineering Task Force, ET, and in my opinion, the ITU representing more countries, more participants, on the national level of discourse and narrative of work, in order to ensure greater cooperation with these organizations, in order to ensure greater coordination. It's the efforts of this organization. And the last thing I want to mention here, that over the period of activity of the ITU, the ITU is a unique organization. The elected positions, as opposed to all other UN bodies, there are 5 candidates, and it is a constellation of the ITU. In addition to the Secretary General, there is also Deputy Secretary General and 3 heads of bureaus for standardization, ready communication, and development. Plus, there is also Deputy Secretary General, and as I have already mentioned, these 5, they determine the field work and all endeavors that are carried out by the organization, delegated by the member states to the management to be fulfilled. The role of the Secretary General is far from being an absolute role. Using Latin terms, it is just primus inter pares, first among the equal. The work of the 5 will determine future development.
So throughout the longest time, what we see in the ITU is a certain tradition when people, having been elected for 2 terms at one elected position, run for another office. So our proposal, which was agreed with the administration of the Russian communication, that we should limit one person's time in office to 2 terms, so that there will be no revolving doors inside the ITU, so that at least after 8 years, after staying at the ITU in the leadership, that's usually 8 years, So 2 terms of 4 years, if there are no major complaints about it, it's very easy to run for the second term in office, so that at least there would be a 4-year break between being elected after 2 terms, for example. If the candidate indeed wants to come back to the ITU and be elected, I think it's good that there will be this 4-year break. So the person could go into the science sector, to public sector, maybe as a regulator, or move out to the business sector to learn what's happening outside of the ITU in the field, and to have a fresh view on the work of the ITU later. So this is not part of my 5-step program. I think this is yet another proposal to add more dynamic to the organization. I think only 24 countries out of 192 had the chance to present their candidates, at least presented their candidates, to the office of the ITU elected leadership. I think that's also part of the digital divide that is unfair towards the developing countries. The population of developing countries has long surpassed the developed countries which are occupying these leadership roles. Thank you very much, colleagues. Now it's time for a Q&A. Russia Today, please. You have the floor. Mr. Ismailov, this is Olga Bataman, RT. We have a rather political question. As we all see, lately, the Internet is being used as a political tool. We see that private companies, for example, Meta, are using censorship despite their own principles. Is there a chance that this will change if Russia will be heading the ITU and you become the Secretary General? Thank you. Actually, I think for the first time that happened in 2012, and we raised the issue when we were adopting the regulations for international telecommunications. And the developing countries have raised the issues about the Internet regulation, or at least about the lack of control over it. I don't think the ITU will be able to control or regulate that. However, postponing this issue and solving it, that was happening at different events. Back in the day, it was decided that we should create an Internet Government Forum, which was run under the aegis of the ITU, but it was more of an advisory and consultative body, since it made no resolutions on the Internet regulation. In reality, first we started to talk about that in 2015 or 2013, that we're starting to get a splinter net. And I think I was the first person to say that in 2015, this is not the splintering of the Internet or balkanization, but this is what was happening during the first industrial revolution, when people were thrown away from, people were thrown off their own land because sheep were giving the wool, and back in the day, textile industry was giving the impetus to the whole revolution. So this practice was the platform for what was happening for the past 20 years. This is what's going on in this medium, an uncontrolled medium, uncontrolled space, is causing quite a lot of resistance from the countries who technologically are incapable of controlling that. There is an overwhelming majority of such countries. There are very few countries which to a certain extent have a certain technological digital sovereignty in this regard. I think we can say that naturally that this is the US, to a large extent China, and to a certain extent Russia, maybe South Korea, maybe Japan, but this is not enough. So this is a whole wild world, and this is not Russia who is being accused of trying to suffocate Internet and limit the freedom. This is a matter of access, and it's on the agenda of all the countries. Besides, we're saying that the Internet, from the point of view of technology, became this major platform. But as we proceed, I think that over the past 5 years, the Internet became a medium, a sphere that started to infringe on spiritual and religious values of the countries who present a different view. I went to Saudi Arabia and was present at the Arabian Telecommunication Union, and they were discussing in backrooms. Arabian colleagues were saying that it's unacceptable for us. If you in Russia have certain red lines, we do have our own red lines. That is the discussion of matters that in our culture and in our civilization are not acceptable. There are many examples like that. This was bound to happen sooner or later. That happened because what we started was this fencing, because China built their own firewall. Later, the EU actually built their own, the ones who made a lot of noise about freedom. But they adopted a DPR, data protection law, that protected the rights of their citizens about the personal data protection. We have our own law about sovereign internet, and its implementation included us building technological capacity to counter any interference. I was a director general and actually founder of the company who started to do that, and we were saying that we need to fend off DDoS attacks and possibly block what was happening, protect us from something that's counter to our culture, and also the law that we have adopted about child pornography and suicides and so on and so forth. So we would like the internet to remain a unified platform, a single space. You know, I recently read a research paper from Princeton University in the US. It said that the internet and everything that has to do with it, apps and social media and social networks, and they were studying, they're saying that the human brain is being transformed and there are new neurological networks. So we're changing from the physical point of view. Maybe I would argue with that. When Johann Gutenberg invented the printing press, that's quite similar to what is happening right now, because evolutionary-wise, we did not have this capacity to read. Well, you could argue with that as well, but at a certain point of view, the human being learned how to perceive information from the printed media, and now the internet is doing the same, major changes. African and Arabian countries, not only Russia, including China and India, are all constantly raising the issues that have to do with internet regulation. Moreover, those organizations who don't want to have any regulation, they're saying that the ITU tries to take over the regulation and the management of the internet. That is not so. The representatives of the countries want to have an international legal framework on the regulation of the internet and to agree on it, how it should happen in the sphere of the internet. Thank you. The Moscow Post, please. Thank you. I have several questions. The first one, the incumbent Secretary General, Mr. Ta, said that for the development of this ICT, we need four factors: investment, engagement, innovation, and funding. We know what's the situation in Russia, but if you could also, what are we saying? Infrastructure, innovation, investment, and engagement. And that's applied to Russia, or what? So, what are these basic conditions in Russia? So, what's the situation in Russia? I think the situation is quite good. I cannot speak for the whole of the country, but we can indeed say that we have one of the best quality of internet in major cities, and I think the same goes for smaller towns. From the point of view of infrastructure, we're doing well. Besides, back when I was working at the ministry, we adopted a program that allowed for broadband access to all towns, starting from 250 people. You can imagine the density of our population. You understand that this is a major challenge for our country, and it is still. We're talking about optic cables, and I said that we could Actually, that would be 6 or 5 times around the Earth along the equator. That's the length of optic cable. As the president of Beeline, I can tell you that we've been spending about $1.5 billion annually in infrastructure. That was our investment, and I think the same was done by other companies as well. That's about infrastructure. Now I think we might have certain challenges that have to do with sanctions, first and foremost. We as operators are hoping for import substitution programs. As for software, I think we'll solve that sooner or later. In certain things that have to do with ICT, we have already done that. There are certain gaps that we don't know how we're going to deal with them yet. As for innovation, possibly there is potential in the country. We always had major R&D capacity besides US, Russia, and China. Didn't invent their own engine. We have Yandex, we have Mail.ru. As for social networks, we have VK, Telegram Messenger. That's for innovation part that you mentioned. When I was dealing with IT, I found that we have 1C and Contour program. These are companies with major innovations. I don't know how many people have left after the 24th of February. I mean, the IT people. It happens often. It's not the first time in history. I think we need to rebuild that capacity and to give people the chance to self-develop. As for investment, I mentioned that we were investing a lot of money in that. Besides that, after we've done the investments, we have very affordable services in the ICTs. As for engagement, what is this engagement and who's engaged in what? If you could explain more? Engagement in the process, in the ICT process. I don't really understand that aspect. Possibly we're engaged, but it's hard to evaluate that. I think this is just a Western idea, inclusivity or engagement or whatever. Well, this inclusivity is very hip. I went to Arabian Telecom Union, and the American delegation proposed a resolution that was called gender inclusivity or gender inclusive language. It was hard for me to understand what is this inclusiveness regarding genders. It turns out that the colleagues are insisting on that we don't have a chairman, but we have a chairwoman or chairperson. I said in a certain sense that we do have feminitives for a certain profession, names of a profession, but in some cases it is rather ridiculous. So different languages have different names for everything. But this is one of the new hip things, inclusivity. If you remember, back in the day, agile was also a hip word. Now it's a new thing. Now it's inclusivity. I think that this is actually the ideological thing. I do think that we have engagement. If we talk about stakeholders and market players, we have the state as the regulator. Yesterday, I was talking to president of VEON, that Beeline is part of. He said that you cannot even imagine. You're always lamenting that you're being regulated here and there, but you cannot imagine the analytics that we see lately, how much the ministry has done in order to ease the burden on the operators. And I can tell you what's happening. We have businesses, and there were a lot of things. We did a lot to improve the situation. When I was responsible for ICTs, we actually decreased the benefits put into the pension fund, and we made a registry for the Russian software in order to engage CIS engineers. We needed to take down the threshold of annual salary, because it was about 150,000 US dollars per year, and that just didn't give a chance for the specialists that wanted to invite. They couldn't get a residence permit. Maybe Madam Cherkassa will counter what I said, but I think this is my explanation for the engagement and the sphere where we're working in. Maybe it's not perfect, but I have other examples, and I think this is a workable thing. Thank you. Now, next question about the topic that you've touched upon already is for coverage for broadband. Russia is not so far behind Europe and North America. Can the Western sanctions influence it in some way? Well, it would be quite stupid to say that it will have no impact, but of course there will be an influence of those sanctions simply because major vendors have left, major companies have left. But on the other hand, it's a good thing because this is a challenge, an opportunity to develop our own. I think that our existing infrastructure will hold and will stand up to the current challenges, and I think that we're doing a lot to do import substitution. Sooner or later, these sanctions will be, if not lifted, then made less harsh. If you remember, at the very beginning, we're talking about the fact that the U.S. did not introduce sanctions against hardware for the ICTs. It doesn't mean that there are no gaps, but I can say that we simply cannot cover everything. There will be complete autarky and complete fencing off. I don't think it will be the right thing to do, so we'll need to find some options. And I think we need to go beyond the perimeter of the major vendors and look what's out there. We used to have an argument with one of the officials. I was deputy minister. It was the first wave of sanctions when we were saying that we need to act urgently. And he was saying, why should we? We have an iPhone, everything's working, you can see the apps, and you want to do what? Aurora and so on. I used to work at Nokia, and I remember that we're developing their Symbian operation system. So we managed to do that system, and one of my deputies said that we cannot recreate Google or Apple. We have Ross reserves. We have stewed meat. Preserves. Maybe it's not very tasty. It cannot maybe stand up to cool steaks or jamon from Spain. But if we have nothing to eat, we'll be happy to eat those meat preserves. When everyone will be without food, we'll have this meat, That is why we need to develop that. For us to have basic technologies and to have your own technologies, we should not spare any time or effort or money. Now, the third question about cooperation with other countries. We all know China's role in the ICTs and in the world. What kind of outlook do you see for cooperation between Russia and China bilaterally as part of SCO and BRICS?
I was the first vice president in Huawei, non-Chinese, worldwide. It was a super challenge, banally. No matter where you go, people would speak Chinese. In fact, it is a great fortune to be a boss with the Chinese. You cannot find more diligent workers than they. The boss's word is very strong. Whenever I would go to a Russian enterprise, they would say, "You're a fool, you don't understand, and we have a different culture and ideology." It works in a different way there. I'm far from being a political scientist, and everyone claims we have a strategic alliance with China. We are covering each other's backs, and we are each other's rear front. To China, there is the Communist Party of China, and also business. Huawei, ZTE, business-related priorities. They will proceed from their business interests. perhaps the more the issues they have in the West, the more they're going to cooperate with us. In order to cooperate with China, you have to have a comparable power. So this is secondary. The first thing we should do at home is to strengthen our own infrastructure. Then they will come first. Secondly, China is well aware of the fact that what we are, being a creative nation, Huawei has the world's biggest research and development center. I mean, here in Altufio, in addition to 1,500 people, they added another 1,000 people to this center. While I was there, one of the Russian engineers was awarded the Huawei's biggest award, corporate awards. I mean, because of their invention or standard description, they know our potential. But in order to communicate, we have to be strong. Thank you so much. Colleagues, are there any questions left? Yes, if I may. Vestnik Kavkaza, Arkady Lyskov. Our question concerns the cooperation. Do you intend to involve Southern Caucasus countries for cooperation, Azerbaijan and Armenia specifically? Cooperation for ICTs. I don't think I'm the one to answer this question. I think the ministry should. I mean, do you attach any prospects to their markets? Any market has prospects. When there was Kaspersky business and OneS, we had a huge volume of exports. There was $7.5 billion for ICTs compared to $15 billion of exported arms. The figure was valid about 10 years ago. In the CIS, those we border, our friends, they are the first countries, the first markets we should enter. We should speak with them because we have common culture, common language, after all. And to which extent is it implemented, I'm hardly aware of it. I once visited Bakutel in Baku, so I married business and pleasure, so to speak, because I was born in Baku. I visited this exhibition and I looked for Russian businesses specifically at this exhibition. There were software companies. They created software for the oil industry of Azerbaijan. There were plenty of them. There were good contracts and they were very successful. Thank you. Thank you. Colleagues, do you have any other questions left? My name is Melnikova Yulia. Mr. Ismailov, I have two questions. I'll begin with the first one. What was your election campaign? What steps did the MFA take? What countries did you visit and who did you meet? Wow. I had a fortunate campaign. I left the ministry. It was October 2018. In December 2018, I was the chair of the council of the ITU. And in December, I closed the council and the credentials were given over to the president of the Plenipotentiary Conference of 2018, where they had the same election. And in my opinion, it was a success. Normally, you would have 10 days, according to the regulations of the Council. I held the first part in May, and the second part was just 1 day to close and to give the credentials. The one that I had in May as Deputy Minister, it was a success, 10 days as per schedule, but we finished it within 9 days. Everyone told me, country representatives told me, it is the first time ever such debates, such questions. We cannot make any progress. We postpone normally to the next meeting. However, here we have made huge progress and success. Konstantin Noskov, back then, was the Minister of Digital Development. he told me that many people approached him, saying that you guys have a ready candidate. Why shouldn't you nominate him? Later, I was invited in December. Mikhail Mamonov was in charge of international cooperation, so they too approached me. What do you think? Back then, I was the CEO of Nokia Russia. I didn't mind. Then it went on, but then it all stopped because of COVID-19 lockdowns. I had a bit luck. I was the Director General of DZO, then the President of Wimpelcom, and this requires a lot of efforts. And I concentrated more on it. At the same time, in May, Ms. Cherkasova told me that I should do this. Then I had COVID-19. It caught up with me. It took a month and a half of my life, and I recovered later, about 6 months before the end of the credentials. Ms. Cherkasova invited me to the Russian mission in Geneva on the occasion of Day of Russia in early June. What happened in the ITU? There were 2 or 3 events. I thought back then there were representatives from our country that were far from politics. I mean, from the Academy of Sciences, from the Radio Institute. They were thrown out after the 24th of February in violation of every and single law, in violation of the ITU Charter, Governing Commission. From the viewpoints of political efforts, they had nothing to do with this. They were experts. They worked in the ITU for 20, 30 years. They made a unique contribution. And my opinion was that this meeting would gather little people. In fact, there was a huge gathering. And it was a revelation. There was about 65 or 70 ambassadors, heads of missions in Geneva. So things were far from what we thought they were. And behind the scenes, we heard that Russia is a hope, ray of hope to us. In terms of visits to countries, few countries left, few meetings left. I couldn't visit Kigali on the Telecommunication Development Conference, but on the lower level, I visited almost every activity, the African Telecommunication Union in Algeria, and we with Ms. Cherkasova visited the place. She introduced me to the public. There were multiple meetings, and they also instilled hope. And it didn't look as if there was a desperate attempt. No, in fact, we saw a lot of support. Then there was the Regional Communion of Communications. This is the event organized by CIS countries at Issyk-Kul Lake. And I visited the place in addition to CIS representatives. There were also representatives from other countries. The event was great. They spoke Russian, easily understood. And there were many of my previous ministry colleagues. And the last event I visited was 3 weeks ago, the Arab Telecommunication Union, on the 1st of September. There were 22 Arab countries, regional players. I didn't go to high-profile events. I think I would have more difficulty restraining myself. I mean, when you stand as a candidate for the post of the Secretary General, you should meet all courtesy rules. I cannot but express my indignance of what happened to our candidates at the previous events at the World conference for the standardization of radio communications and the conference for development of radio. It was really arbitrary behavior towards our colleagues. Thank you so much. I had two questions. If you allow, my small question is, what number of countries can support you as the candidate? Did the MFA make any estimates of this? If you allow, I'd like to take this question. In fact, as Mr. Ismailov explained, we had a lot of negotiations with different countries. I would like to emphasize that it wasn't we who sought a meeting. In fact, these were the colleagues who wanted to hear out Mr. Ismailov, his program. I wouldn't voice the exact number, but we have an official confirmation from a number of countries that stand ready to support our candidate at the Plenipotentiary Conference. It is a good number. There are some countries that have not officially confirmed, but primarily during the negotiations they have expressed their support to us. So let us not jump the gun. Our opinion is that we will have a decent look. Thank you. Colleagues, do you have any other questions? If there are no more questions left, then we are close to concluding this meeting. Mr. Ismailov, do you have any concluding remarks? We need to fit into the trend. Pelevin once in his books said that any reality is a sum of information technologies. I don't remember the exact novel he put it in about 10 years ago in one of his novels. But the more we live, the more I see that this prediction was very true. In addition to Pelevin, who is there among authors who would have such a strong effect on the minds of at least my generation? In terms of consciousness shaping, ethical shaping, personality shaping, I think the Strugatsky brothers were such authors. In the Отягощенный Islam book, they said, one thing that meets my program very much, the attitude that we should have to ICTs and to this rapid development. In this book, they said that humanity is above all principles. Humanity is above every principle, even those principles that were born by humanity itself. I think we live in a moment of time when we face challenges. Here, sitting in this room, I remember we were convened by an ambassador at large. I was among information security experts, and we discussed challenges and threats issues. And we realized suddenly at some point, and I think Snowden was the trigger, everyone is keeping shameful silence about the person, as if it is discourteous to discuss the person. But in fact, it was a transformative and eye-opening experience, really. I was in the internet. I was a great fan of the Wire magazine in the early 2000s. There was an activist of cybercommunism, Richard Barbrook, who wrote a fundamental book covering all future-related aspects related to human development, to ICT's development. He was very optimistic. But in fact, all these things started happening. More and more difficult, and being focused on the internet inside of the company, I see the growing number of DDoS attacks. Instead of progress, we see retardment, deceleration, intimidation of people who are afraid to leave their digital trace. They are afraid of personal data leaks. So we any technology, and it is also written in the program, the better the technology, the more human component there is in it. So we can build a dialogue both with major corporations, with the academia, with the West. No matter what people say, that we are confronting the West. No, in fact, the West came up with the things we are currently using. And quantitatively, the East also is calling for our demand. In Hamlet, they used to say that the West and East outrageous behavior would be shameful. To reformulate it, I think I, as a candidate, can implement this plan. There were wide coverage of my professional competences as an employee of Huawei, Ericsson, Nokia, and at the ministry, but cultural-wise, I'm well aware of the ambitions and also aspirations. Talking about a Chinese business or Ericsson, I think I was a successful manager. They are very different in terms of culture. Siemens, I was the head of the Siemens branch, and Nokia. In terms of culture, there were relations. We need to conduct this dialogue. We need a person that would have understanding of both the Arabs, the Chinese, and the Americans too. Thank you. Mr. Ismailov, thank you very much for a very interesting conversation. Colleagues, thank you for the spent time. Thank you and have a good day.